The Converted Man here. This is answers we got to the questions that we asked creationists, part 2. These answers come courtesy of beefcoursemeal. Unfortunately, we do have one minor issue. Beef course answers are not in any particular order, and he said to me when I asked him about this in PM, he said he didn't remember what the order was. So I'm just going to read the answers in the order that they appear in the comments on my video and respond to them as I'm able to. First answer he provides, it says Cain and Abel married their sister, ? So this is in response to how did two people with no daughters get more people? Well, one of those guys, Abel, was killed by Cain. So, did he marry his sister and have a baby with her before he was killed? And this is just not recorded? See, the thing is, it's not recorded. It doesn't say what you think that it says. So, I would say, what verse says this? It's not in there. So, you're wrong about this. It doesn't tell us where these people came from. It's just all of a sudden there's more people as you read through Genesis. You go from 2 people to 4 people to 3 people, and then all of a sudden, bam, lots of people. So it doesn't say that they married their sister. Also, this is a problem if they did marry their sister, even if one of them did. The kid that they had would have been genetically screwed up, and we have plenty of evidence to support that idea. If a brother and a sister have a kid, that kid is deformed. That kid is not normal. And the more inbreeding you have, the worse that gets. Even first or second cousins can cause these sort of problems, but the percentage likelihood that they will goes down as you go. So if it was true that this structure of reality that we have is all from one man and woman, we would have ample evidence of this, but we don't. So we should conclude that that isn't the case. He says, and again, everything you know about reality is the same thing we look at? I'm bleeped if I know which one this is responding to. I guess this one is, how do you feel about everything that we know about reality contradicts your position? This is the whole, we're looking at the same data, we think it's creation, you don't. Okay. We are looking at the same data, but we're using very different methodology to get to a conclusion. I'm using the methodology of science and logic, and you're just using the methodology of, I can't explain this, therefore God. At least I assume that's what the methodology you're using is. If you have a different one, let me know. So it says, yes, I can. When the end times come, there will be many major earthquakes and natural disasters. I guess this is there proof of God? Or some question like that. Well, that's very convenient because we don't know when the end times are, one. Secondly, the end times is not talked about in the Bible at all. And this is a mistake that many Christians make. Revelations, and certain parts of Acts and other places in the Bible, are not prophesying about the end of the world. They're talking about events that are very near and close by and that happen within the people's lifetime that were there. Revelation is talking most likely about Nero and his empire. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't predict the end times. And even if it did, then it joins the ranks of other books that try to predict the end times, and positing that the evidence will eventually get here isn't good enough. We need the evidence now. If we don't have the evidence now, we must be skeptical about it now. He says, I ask myself why God allowed things to happen, knowing it was going to happen. So that is a question I can't give you an answer to. I'm guessing that's the answer to the why did God have a flood and kill millions of people. So I'm glad that you say you don't have an answer. That's a very noble and brave position to take. I often take the position that I don't know the answer. But if you can't answer why God would do something wrong, perhaps there isn't an answer to that. The only answer could be that, one, it isn't a real God, because a real God wouldn't do something wrong, and therefore you're worshiping the wrong God. Or two, something is wrong with this God's morality, and thus you shouldn't worship that God. One of those two things might be true. He says, I was a creationist after I read the Bible. But tell me this, why is it that anywhere in the world where people have a belief that things made the universe? Well, I guess this is that answer to were you creationist before or after you read the Bible. And in regards to his question, very well, I'll answer that question to the best of my ability. The reason why there are lots of people around the world that believe something made the universe is because humans are pattern seekers. We have an enlarged frontal lobe that is very, very good at detecting patterns even when there really isn't a pattern. We'll just perceive a pattern. When our ancestors were walking the African plains, it was safer to assume that an animal made a noise rather than, say, the wind. Eventually, when humans started fighting other humans, our brains had to develop to protect us from ourselves. And so, survival of the fittest would encourage brains that assumed that it was humans, or assumed that it was someone that was attacking or making noise rather than some other phenomenon. So eventually what happened is we would have brains that were especially alert to someone doing whatever the thing is. So let's say we have somebody that's in this condition walking along the African plains and they get hit in the head by a rock, and they put their hand on their head, they look around, thinking that it's somebody attacking them. They're either ready to flight or fight. Their adrenaline has kicked in. They don't see anyone. They don't see any mountain nearby. They see no reason that a rock should just fall on their head. There's no trees around. They have no explanation for this. But someone must have thrown the rock. But they don't see anyone. So they go home and they tell the rest of the tribe about this. And before long, we have a rock-throwing god. Now, in reality, the rock was launched from a faraway volcano. But there's no way that that person would have known that or thought about that or been able to investigate that. So the idea that someone that cannot be seen through this rock is an explanation that they all agree on because they don't know any better. And as our brains became more and more complex over the centuries, so too do our ideas about a god. Because when you look at all the different religions in the world that there are today, all the different posits of God that there are, it's always to explain why things are the way they are. And then if you look at science and the answers that science has, you'll see that almost without any room for very close to being correct or aligned with science. Science almost always disagrees with every single religion about how things came to be. There's maybe one or two religions that get it close by accident, and of course with all the different religions we should expect that to happen. But nonetheless, they're guessing at what the answer is. They don't know what the answer is. We guessed that the earth was flat. We guessed wrong. We guessed that the earth was round. We guessed right. But we don't know if our guess is right or wrong until we investigate and find out for ourselves whether or not the world is flat or round. And when we find out what it is through that investigation, we can declare what it is. We don't have to rely on the instincts of our ancestors and just go, well, I can't explain it. It must be someone or something that did it. Well, maybe it was someone or something, but why not investigate it? Why not do that work? It's easier to just go, oh, must be God. That's why so many people have this idea. He says, if you take out religion, there would be no religious wars saving millions. Take out science, you take away what the base of our society is. If our society was built in a giant boulder and I decided to take the boulder away, I would have nothing because that boulder is what I base my society off of. Very good answer to the what would happen if religion disappeared, what would happen if science disappeared. I think you maybe understand where the skeptic is coming from here on this. Religion, if it went away, the world would be better without it. And it wouldn't be better off without science. So why be part of a religion that's part of the problems? So he says, about the entity performing a single action without the space to do it, how can the universe be made from nothing? How do you get all this from nothing? If you say that it was lucky combination of those two or more atoms, where did they come from? Well, these are all good questions, and the answer is, I don't know. Here's where we have a problem with our pattern seeking as humans. I just said we should investigate everything. Here comes a point where we can't investigate because of our lack of technology, because of our lack of understanding and combination thereof. We have gotten to this point where we just do not know. We have a mystery. We can't solve that mystery by just saying God did it. Because that's not the answer. It might be the answer. I understand you want it to be a possible answer. But we don't know. We have no way of knowing what the answer really is. If the universe came from nothing, we have no idea how that works. We don't know why it would or how it would. But utilizing science, we might discover that. We might unfathom that. We might understand that finally. We might never understand it. We may never have the answer to these sort of questions. Are we to fill in the gap of our understanding with a wizard did it or God did it? The two are equivalent as far as I'm concerned. It was magic. Magic made the universe. Or something other that might be equally as ludicrous. Time travelers came back in time and made the universe. It's ridiculous, but it's possible. So we can't posit what the answer is when we don't know what the answer is. And when we don't know, we should be brave and courageous like you were earlier and say, I don't know. Rather than filling in that mystery with an answer or allowing our brain to say someone did it, as our brain often wants to do. He says, you can't talk about creationism on a science site because everyone goes ballistic when God becomes involved with science. But tell me this, We all know or have seen the graph depicting a chimpanzee turning into a human. If that really happened, why are there no fossils of the stages in between human and ape? To go from walking like a chimp to a human, our pelvis would have to change drastically to walk upright. So there's a lot of things here, and this is the why is creationism not talked on science forums question. Okay, people go ballistic, quote unquote, not because of God, once again, but because creationism has no predictive qualities. It can make no predictions. Thus, it is not and will never be science until it does make a prediction and make tests that can be repeated and so on and so forth. God is not something that can be tested. So God, too, is not a scientific thing. As far as your question, you're wrong. It's not a chimpanzee turning into a human. If you've seen a graph like that, it's incorrect. It's a primate turning into Homo sapien, if you will. And the stages from there to where we do have the fossils of those. So they do exist. Now, there's not as many as we might like, but they do exist. And we no longer need the fossils because we have the DNA evidence. The DNA evidence blows away all questions about origins, period. The DNA evidence is so strong that we don't need the fossils anymore, period. We are 1% different than our primate cousins, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, orangutans, etc. We all have a common ancestor, and our DNA proves that. But, to answer the question, fossils have to have a very certain environment to be able to form. So, we often miss fossils in the records because they did not form. But we do have an awful lot of them. So we do have the transitionary fossils by and large. There are maybe a few missing, but it's irrelevant. We have the DNA. We have other things that can prove this as well. So I understand the question. I would ask you to research this. Not just go, well, I don't understand this graph. How can this be possible? Why not get a biology book and find out? Says, you can't be positive about the Earth's age because there's no way of knowing if the tests we use are right. What if in a couple years we find out that the test we use to find the age of things is wrong and 40,000-year-old bones turned out to be only 60,000 years old? We are positive that these are the ages. The radiometric testing is consistent across the board. The radiation decay is a known property. These things decay universally. We know how long it takes something to die. We know how to graph this. We have confirmed it multiple times with meteors and other planets and so on and so forth. Then, setting all that aside, we also have tree rings, which is never, ever, ever addressed by the creationists because it ruins their arguments. The tree rings are not anything to do with radiometric data, and we know that the trees make these rings as they grow older and older, and that we can measure the space between the rings to get the age of the tree. And we can measure it back and back and back, and we can tell how old a tree is. And we have trees that are older than 6,000 years old. We know this, okay? And then we have other things that confirm the age being far, far older than you would project here. What I guess you're saying is, well, but science allows for errors to happen, couldn't it be that we find out that we were wrong? Maybe. But the chances that we're wrong about the age of the Earth are minuscule because of the multiple lines of evidence that we have for it. We're not just relying on one radiometric dating idea. We have multiple radiometric dating ideas. Then we have the tree rings. Then we have the speed of light itself, which is something that's quantifiable and measurable. We wouldn't see as many stars in the sky today if the Earth was younger than it was. We would not have that many stars in the sky, and we can measure that and test that and confirm that. So that too is a known data sample. We have that as well. We have how the different layers of Earth form, and we know how that works. We can know how long coal takes to form or how long diamonds takes to form, and we can make predictions based on that. And all of this is something that we can use to make predictions. We go, okay, if the age of the Earth is this old, we should find a walking fish in this part of the strata. And we dig down, and lo and behold, we find the walking fish. If something was wrong in our calculations, we shouldn't have been able to make such an accurate prediction. But we did, and the result was there. And we find it again and again and again. So, we have the data. We're sure about the data. If you want to say, well, it could be something else, then produce the test to show that it is something else, and then make predictions using that test. But then we get a problem, because I can now take your former position and say, oh, but how do we know tomorrow that your test won't change? That's the problem with this. You don't understand the science. You don't understand the power of testing, repeated testing, and the predictive model that those tests form. You want to say, well, but it could be something else, and give no argument for that. That's not good enough. Do the research yourself and find out what the real information is about this. Don't just go, well, it could be wrong. Find out that it's not wrong, and the degree of certainty on the age of the Earth is extraordinarily high. There's a very small room of margin for error within those calculations of 4.54 billion years old. There's a very small margin of error that we have in those calculations. Minuscule. And it would have to be insanely big to have a different number. He says, there is no answer for evidence for creationists because we look at the same evidence as you evolutionists but interpret it differently. There's only one way to interpret things. The right way. And then there's every other way, which is wrong. Somebody once said, and I think this is brilliant, there's medicine and then there's everything else that's bullshit, which is alternative medicine. There's real medicine, real science, and then there's pseudoscience, which is bull. There's a way to look at things, and then there's the bull. I can do a magic trick. It's not a very impressive one, but I can do it. There is no real magic. It's illusion. It's trickery. That's all it really is. But somebody somewhere would buy the idea that it was magic. They would agree that it was magic and look no further to explain it. You look not at the same evidence. In fact, your own questions prove that you personally have not looked at the same evidence as I have looked at. Because you said there's gaps in their fossil record. There's a few, but not as many as you're making it out to seem, and it also doesn't matter because of the DNA evidence, which you didn't mention at all. As far as the age of the Earth, you mention one dating type, you don't even mention what it's called, and you say, well, could it be wrong? But give no reason to think that it is wrong. So you don't know what the evidence actually is. So you haven't looked at the evidence that I've looked at. That's one problem. Secondly, if you're looking at it and you're drawing a different conclusion and your conclusion cannot be tested, repeated, or make predictions, then your conclusion is wrong. Period. That's why it's not science. So go learn the real science and find out why you're wrong. He says, my God is right one because that is how my faith is. I'm a Catholic, by the way. Could we be wrong? Yes. But by what our faith is, there's only one God. Okay. Fair enough. This is, how do you know your God's the right God question, I think. Alright, your faith says that your God's right. And the Mormons' faith says that their God's right, and the Muslims say that their God's right, and the Hindus say that their God's right, and so on and so forth. There was a couple of Latter-day Saints out and about on Thanksgiving Day proselytizing. And I asked them, do they have any empirical evidence, repeatable test, or logically coherent argument? The guy didn't know what empirical evidence was. I had to explain that. He said no to all three. I said, well, what do you got? He said, faith. I said, well, is faith a way to determine what is real? Because anyone can have faith about anything. He said, no, but we have faith. So he admitted that faith isn't a way to determine what's really real. So you don't know that what you have is really real. You just believe very strongly that it is real. What investigation have you done? If it is real, then your investigation will only produce more and more evidence to prove it to all of us skeptics. You have not done this. By the way, if you are Catholic, you're being against the Pope, which is something as a Catholic you shouldn't be doing. The Pope has made it clear that the Catholic Church agrees with biological evolution, and to do otherwise is to reject how God made things. The Pope said it. You can go look that up as a Catholic. You should know better. If you are a Catholic, I'm pretty sure, but I could be wrong, that the Church's position on the age of the Earth is similar as well, that they say we should be in line with science, and that to be a creationist is a bad thing. The Pope has said this. Maybe not this current Pope, but the Pope before him, or maybe the Pope before him. One of the Popes said it. I don't know which one. I'm not a Catholic. Look it up, and you tell me which Pope it is, and then you as a Catholic explain to me how you're able to ignore what the Pope says. Because that's not following your own religion. So in this case, I have not only a scientific reason for you to go study what the facts really are, but I also have a theological reason. If you want to be a real Catholic, then you have to follow what the Pope says, and what one of the popes said was biological evolution. We're totally fine with it. The Church says yes to it. You should as well to be a good Catholic. So if you say no to it, then you're a bad Catholic. Okay. So, next. Whew. Before I move on, I'm glad that you said that you could be wrong. Again, very brave, very noble position to say that you could be wrong. According to science, a platypus is a mammal. It would be classified by its own genus, class, and order because it fits the criteria to be in the Mammalia kingdom, and platum because of its other characteristics, it would make its own group. Yeah, according to science. But the question is not what science says, but what creationism claims, which is that every animal has its own kind, quote unquote. The word kind is never used in science because it's not a scientific term. I'm glad that you went to the science on this thing. I don't understand why you didn't go to the science for anything else, but you went to the science to find out what the platypus's kind was, and you didn't respond to the question because you went with what science says about the platypus, which is correct. There isn't a kind, which means that the creationism model of kinds is not a real thing, which is another reason why you should reject it. He says, there's no exact date of when the world is created, but you ask us, creationists, how God was created out of nothing. How was the universe created? Okay, what? I don't know what this is answering. Well, maybe the Bible doesn't tell you when the world was created. Many creationists have come up with this arbitrary number of 6,000 years old, and that's based on some weird math that somebody did. It's a doctrine, not an actual thing that you find in the Bible. But then he says, somebody said God is being created out of nothing. I don't know. God is said to be eternal by most theists that I'm aware of. Not all theists, but many theists. And then he says, how was the universe created? I don't know. I don't know how the universe was created. And so if we're going to say that God too needs a creator or needs to be created, we wouldn't know the answer to that. So there are things we're not going to know the answers to. The thing is, theology says it has the answers. It says it has the answers. But it doesn't have the answer to questions like, what's God made out of? Or where did God come from? Or how long has God existed? It just says, well, forever. Okay. What's God made out of? Spirit. What's a spirit made out of? Soul. What's a soul made out of? It's made out of soul stuff. How does that work? How does God's brain function? Does it have a brain? What does it have in place of a brain? Where is heaven located? What is heaven? What is it made out of? Is it made out of anything? Describe this to us in ways that we could comprehend. Nope, not done, not even hinted at. So, religion doesn't have all the answers, but they claim that they have the answers, and that suggests that they have all the answers. But they don't. Science doesn't have all the answers, nor does it make the claim that it has all the answers, or it has many answers, but not all. So your religion claims it has all the answers, science does not. Your religion doesn't have all the answers, but claims that it does. Science doesn't have all the answers, and says, yeah, we don't have all the answers. So science is being more honest than religion is. I think that's a problem. Maybe you don't. Okay, so then he says, in the old days, the Israelites would make a sacrifice of their best lamb to repent for their sin. It wouldn't take sin away from them, but it was more of a pardon for what they'd done. Jesus lived a perfect life with no sin ever committed. He would pay for our sins. It doesn't say it takes away sin forever, so this is in response to my question, why is there still sin? What's the point of a sacrifice that doesn't do the sacrifice's point? The whole point is to get rid of sin forever and for all time. So it didn't work. It didn't take. It wasn't quite good enough. Why? Well, it's another question. I don't really want to go off on this tangent of why does God require sacrifice in the first place? But why? Why doesn't it take? Why didn't it work? Why is it that there's a different requirement, an additional requirement? If this sin thing exists, and then it takes a perfect life and a sacrifice of that perfect life to make it A-okay, then it should be A-okay. It shouldn't still exist. But it does. So something didn't work right. So it wasn't good enough. It wasn't the perfect sacrifice because it didn't really take. There's an additional requirement. There's something that we have to do in response to that sacrifice. And I just think that there's problems with that. He says, in Genesis, Adam and Eve created sin, which allowed sin to come into the world and cursed it at the same time. I don't know what this is in response to. So, what's my comment going to be? I kind of want to go with logic on this and just say circular argumentation. But why would God allow sin to enter the world? God knew that it was going to be nothing but problems. God set up the conditions that it knew would fail so that it could set up the solution that it knew was still not good enough. That just isn't good enough. God is blundering around doing things that a deity that is all-wise shouldn't be doing. And that suggests to me that it's not really the real deity. Neanderthal is pretty much a less sophisticated version of a human, but it is still an animal, so it would have gone on the ark because a male and female of each species went onto the ark. I'm sorry, I'm crying for the death of logic and science. Where do I even start with this one? Noah, if he existed during the Neanderthal, is way, way far back in the past. The Neanderthal, we find the genetics of Neanderthal in humans today. So we did have breeding with them. So you're saying that we bred with animals, making us also animals, rendering the whole idea that we're not animals wrong. And also, if you're going to accept Neanderthal, then you might as well accept biological evolution, which you're not doing. So, I think you missed the point of the question, but somebody else can say more on this. I just have to move on from this. It's just... Yahweh is the name God told Moses to use when talking to the Egyptian Pharaoh. It means I am who I am. No idea what this is an answer to. Okay. Yeah. Doesn't really tell me anything. I have nothing to say on this. I really don't. I don't know what this is an answer to. So what? What does this mean to me? It doesn't really mean anything to me. Okay, moving on. You can't prove evolution or creationism using science. There are gaps in evolution and creation. We look at the same evidence but interpret it differently because we have different mindsets. We could argue for 1,000,000 years, but there would be no clear answer. Okay, so I've done this whole video objectively and calmly, except for the little bit of fake crying that I did. Here's the point where I snap and go ballistic. So turn down your speakers. How can you be so wrong? Ah! Okay, I'm done now. Yes, you can prove evolution. We don't have gaps, not the way that you're thinking, I don't think. And even if we do have gaps, doesn't matter. We have the DNA. We have other evidence. You don't have anything for creationism, period. There is no evidence for it. There's no way to test it. It makes no predictions, period. We look at the same evidence. I said it before, I'll say it again. No, we don't. You're not looking at the evidence. You're looking at pieces of the evidence. You're not looking at the whole thing. I doubt very much that you've read a biology book at all, or at least lately, because you would know a lot of the answers to these questions by now. As far as having different mindsets, yeah, I agree. I go where the evidence leads. You look at the evidence and ignore it and then pretend that it means that God did it. So yeah, we have very different mindsets. But there's a problem. Again, creationism, which denies pieces of science, very specific pieces of science too, denies the age of the Earth, denies biological evolution, and may or may not say that the Earth is in the center of the universe, which is geocentrism, and may or may not have other weird ideas as well, does not align itself with science. It rejects science. Not due to the Bible, or being a Christian, or being a Catholic in your case, but because of a doctrine, because of a teaching that has become widespread, specifically in America, but other places as well. As I said, Catholics should embrace biological evolution hands down. There shouldn't be a single Catholic out there who says no to it because the Pope said go along with it. If nothing else, they should be embracing it by faith because their Pope said to do it. I don't want you to do it that way. I want you to embrace it because of the evidence, not because your Pope said to follow along with it. But my point is still my point that you shouldn't be denying biological evolution as a Catholic. So that really irritates me. But the theology aside, the reasons I want you to accept it are not due to blind faith, but to do with the evidence, which you haven't looked at, which you haven't examined, and which you don't understand. As far as arguing for 1,000,000 years, well, we couldn't do that because we would die unless science develops a way for us to live that long. And yes, there is a clear answer. If we use logic and we use science, we get to the answer. It's only when we ignore science or logic that we don't arrive at the answer. And that's what's happening here. There's a disconnect between reality and your doctrine. You can believe in God and agree with everything that science says. And the Catholic Church has taken the position that you should do that. I want you to take the position because the evidence wants you to do that. Not because the church tells you to. But either way, you should agree with biological evolution. If you're doing it based on faith, then you still won't have all these answers. So you need to do the research, you need to learn about it, and see, hey, not only does the Pope say that it's true, it actually is true! Learn it! Find out! Do the research! Read! Okay, so a little bit exasperated, a little bit irritated at the end there. I do apologize, but that will happen every now and then. These aren't all the answers to all the questions, but they are answers. And again, many of them, I have no idea which question he's responding to. Maybe you can figure that out. I really don't know. Some of them I guessed at, but we have a conversation going. There was one answer given by one other YouTuber who I was trying to ask whether or not he wanted to be in this video. I couldn't tell if he was just answering the question to answer the question, or if he was a creationist, or what. And since it was only one answer, it doesn't get its own video, unless he wants to answer all the questions. And he didn't respond by the time I've made this video, so it's not here. But you can see his answer in the comments on the questions video, and you can respond in text format if you want to. Or if you want to answer all of these questions yourself in a video format, please feel free to do so. My field, quote unquote, is logic. My understanding of the sciences sucks, and I need to improve it, and I know that I need to improve it, and I'm like, okay, it's time to get another book and start reading it, because I need to learn more. So I often point to other YouTubers who know more than I do about these things, and I often rely on my viewers to give this information. But what's so frustrating is that again and again and again I find myself imploring people to do the research themselves. Is this the side effect that religion produces, that we get people who will not be inquisitive and just follow along? Just say, yeah, this is true. Okay, yeah, that's true. But then what's weird is we go, well, why not do the research? There's not really an answer given. Or, well, because we were told that the research is invalid. Why not do the research to find out if the research is invalid or not? Because we were told not to do that. I what do we do with that? I really don't know. But nonetheless, at least we do have a conversation going between these two gentlemen, and perhaps others will answer these questions as well. And I think that if we're civil and we do our best to answer the questions that we can answer, that we hopefully will encourage them eventually to do the research, if nothing else, to show us that we're wrong. I would hope that they do real research and not fake research, but who knows? At the end of the day, for Beef Course Meal, he has two reasons to embrace biological evolution. He has the theological reason that the Catholic Church and the Pope have said that the Catholic Church embraces biological evolution, and then he has the scientific reason that it is fact. I want him to research that and find out that it is fact. I don't just want him to go along with it because his authority figure tells him to. But nonetheless, he should be in agreement with it. If only we could get the Protestants to do a similar thing where all Protestant churches just said, yes, we agree with biological evolution. And to be part of our church, you need to agree with biological evolution. But they don't have an authority type of system. But then, what we would get, if that was in place, we would get people who believed in biological evolution by faith rather than by evidence, which is one of the things that is claimed by many creationists, is that we just accept this by faith, which is completely untrue. We have mounds and mounds and tons of evidence for this stuff. And not once do they actually look at it. They don't look at it. They can't be looking at it. Because if they were, they would agree with it. They wouldn't have a problem with it. This is an issue entirely about somebody's doctrine that is being spread around. That you have to disbelieve in evolution and the age of the earth in order to believe in God. Somebody spread that lie around. And it's not true. It is a false teaching and it needs to die. I am going to leave your belief in God alone, although I would love to challenge it, as long as you align yourself with science. By doing this, you're creating a stumbling block for me, and you're also doing something that the Bible says not to do. I've said that in my last video, I'm pretty sure. But it bears repeating. Follow your own teachings. You're not doing it. Why not investigate? You're not doing that. Do those things, come back, and say, hey, deconverted man, I looked up biological evolution, I did the research, and yeah, I agree with it now. I'm no longer a creationist, but I still believe in God. And I'll be like, alright, woo! One less person to worry about. Do you want to debate God? Yes or no? And we can go from there. If you don't want to debate God, fine! Go about your merry way and have a good day. If you want to debate God, we can do that. That's wonderful. And then I'm going to tell you to go learn logic so that you can come back and know how to do logic, and so that we can have a logical debate and that you can be well armed in it and try to present the best case that you're able to present. I'll win, most likely, but maybe, just maybe, if you do all of those things, you can come back with a scientific knowledge, and if you save yourself time and also learn logic while you're at it, come back with the logical knowledge and be like, hey, deconverted man, I've created an argument that's going to blow you out of the water for the existence of God or for a God. And I'll be like, all right, let's debate that. That sounds great. Let's have at that. But right now, we're not even close to that. We're nowhere near it. You are so far away from being able to even hint at convincing me that there's a God that I can barely even see you. Because you are beyond an impassable mountain, beyond an impassable chasm, across the uncrossable river, right behind a very large blockade of bull, and I can just barely make out, I think it's a piece of your head, but I can't tell from this distance. Maybe it's not even you, and there's no way I'm going through all that to get to you. You have to remove each of those barriers and come to me. So, unless and until you're willing to do that, I have to continue to remain skeptical of your conclusions.